And continue. So, as I said, thank you for coming, and I look forward to everyone enjoying this talk today. And this is very much a subject I'm very close to, the Scandinavian, also the German one as well. So let's get started right on it, Benningham. So Nordic capitalism is a mixed economic model, and which everyone seems to be mixed up about. And why is everyone mixed up about? We'll talk about that. Capitalism constantly evolves and changes. It's seldom static, and it is heavily influenced by national, historical, and cultural factors and patterns. Now, the Nordics go against the character of low taxes and minimal government interference, which makes it sound socialist when considering the definitions and characteristics. And as you remember in the past lectures, we talked about a secondary characteristic of capitalism being land privately owned, low taxes, minimal government interference, and rule of law. So there you have it. That's why people get mixed up about it. So Bernie Sanders called it Scandinavian socialism, but it's not. It's a mixed model capitalism, also known as a capitalist welfare state. Now, using Nordic capitalism would have been correct and kept fearmongers in check without saying socialism. In the 1980s, Sweden returned to capitalism, to a market-based economy on a new wave of privatization. Now, US and UK capitalist proponents, they may be critical, but they realize what the Nordic model represents. It's a highly successful managed capitalism of low inequality, high taxes, and a steady annual growth and prosperity to be envied. So Nordic capitalism reconciled both capitalism and socialism together for a prosperous economy and society. Nordic capitalism countries with big social welfare systems are commonly dismissed as socialism. Bernie unintentionally kept this myth alive, referring to it as socialism. So Nordic nations organize society and economy together more successfully than any capitalist model. It is the only socioeconomic model of the last century to withstand the test of time up to globalization era of the 19th century. And you'll see the chart that I have there on this first slide. It gives you an idea of how successful they've been from 1870 to 1970. Now, the only blips in that curve, of course, World War I, the Great Depression, and World War II. So, recognized worldwide with an undeniable track record, as I just pointed out to the chart, the highest per capita income growth in the whole world between 1870 to 1970, a rich country behind only Switzerland, the US, and Denmark, a socio-economic system with growth, prosperity, innovation, and unparalleled health and social services, dominant in the soft power categories of happiness, quality of life, high living standard, and most democratic, and many other qualifications. Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Denmark seem to have it all and appear to be a new land of opportunity. Now, the socialism label sticks more or less because it has a large social welfare system, which automatically is linked to socialism by many. So, but rather than government running the entire economy, Nordic countries balance market competition with a highly developed social safety net. Now, universal health care, free education, child care for working families, alongside laws that rigorously protect worker rights, these were characteristic of past socialism regimes, but never in the definition for socialism as such. In addition to this, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, and Finland have high living standards and low income disparity, which means less inequality, that has drawn the world, to them for the past 20 years. Okay. Uh, Ibrahim, I'm locked on the screen here. Can you see if I use this? There we go. Thank you. So Nordic capitalism, debunking the socialist myth. The image of the Nordic countries as socialism is outdated refers to the 1970s and the 1980s. So slipping into government expansion and more regulation. From 1965 to 1975, Swedish state employees grew from 700,000 to 1.2 million, a 71% increase. So government economic intervention and the number of new regulatory authorities also expanded. So this was when they were having their socialist experiment. So in 1970 and 1984, the public sector absorbed an entire Swedish workforce growth to expand social services. So studies found later that most of these job creations were just an extension of local administrative positions. You know, people got their friends to help them do the job they were doing, I guess. So disruption to the economy. You'll see the chart on the slide here, which shows spike and declines with reciprocal declines and spike. And you can see the public sector above and the private sector below on those lines. So in 1960, for every 100 market financed Swedes, those are, of course, financed by private enterprise income, there were 38 tax financed. Those were the public sector, those that were dependent on public sector income and investment. So 30 years later, that number was 151 tax financed against 100 market financed. So that's a 397% increase in business dependent upon government financing. More people lived off the system than paid into it. So as such, the economy was unsustainable and it was in need of reform. So private capital and talent flight in the 1970s and the 80s, often referred to as voting with your feet, the switch from the free economy to a socialist model led to very unpopular results. Prominent businessmen and a lot of these other high income earners, such as film directors and sports stars, left Sweden to reside elsewhere and to avoid Swedish taxes. And one of these was Ikea's Ingvar Kamprad. He was the CEO then, also director Ingmar Bergman and tennis great Bjorn Borg. Economic deterioration had continued, aided by extreme labor market regulation and constant expansion of the state's role. So putting the brackets on the putting the brakes on with tax reform. The 1990s reforms and excesses, 1991 to 1991 corporate tax cuts, they started off from going down from 57% to 30, then from 26.3 to 22%, eventually by 2013. So estate and wealth taxes were abolished and capital gains taxes were lowered 12.5%. Top marginal income tax rate fell to 50%, which is a reduction of 24 to 27% for a majority of the workforce. Now, between 1993 and 2000, social spending was down 6 to 7% GDP, and economic subsidies fell from 8.7 to 1.8%. And the public sector payroll was down 2.6% from 18.2 to 15.6 GDP. So this was the strong medicine that was needed to reform the economy. And they took this bitter medicine and apparently things worked out. So Nordic capitalism, debunking the socialist myths. I just read, sorry. So we have to ask ourselves, really, why Sweden is different. Sweden has a socially responsible capitalism. Nordic capitalism is driven by social democratic values that seek to humanize capitalism, creating conditions leading to a greater democratic, egalitarian, and solidarity outcomes. It's a we culture as opposed to a me culture. A government system with values similar to socialism, with an economic and capitalist market structure. It uses democracy to give people a say in government actions and to support a competitive economy of shared prosperity, inclusive to those with low paying jobs, to form an egalitarian society. Swedish society is based on consensus democracy rather than majoritarian democracy. Consensus democracy uses consensus decision making in legislative process. This structure considers a broad spectrum of opinions with high citizen participation. The Nordics, Norway, Denmark, Sweden, also Finland, they have high voter turnout of 80% range. Finland and Iceland do not meet this metric, but the other three do. Majoritarian democracies, vote-winning majorities often tend to ignore minority opinions. Scandinavian politics are less partisan and more coalition-oriented, unlike the US. A proportional representation model, it denies any party an absolute parliamentary majority. Again, unlike the US system where you have Team A and Team B, and at any time, one of those two is in power. A successful capitalism, it is known as the middle way. Sweden carved out a path between opposites and reconciling chaotic US capitalism and controlled USSR socialism together into an egalitarian society. It was a successful capitalism of low inequality, high taxes, steady annual growth, and a market-based economy to serve all of society and not a select few, who usually end up controlling the economy through private and state monopolies. And an egalitarian system with high living standards, low crime rates, long life expectancy, and high social cohesion that was made possible by income distributions. It proved a third way of balancing socialism and capitalism together was possible. It's very much in line with the principles of Henry George's writings. So Swedish decision making, inclusive consensus building. You'll see a little diagram here on the right, which helps with that, which helps explain the consensus building platform. But first of all, I want you to look at these squares on the right side, where you see the bottom right corner. The question is, do we all agree? Everyone responds yes in 8 different languages. Almost, always make sure to reach a consensus decision. It's a Swedish social cultural trait seen throughout all levels of society. Also note on the far right side, how to lose a Swedish friend. Above that, just say no, I don't want to drink coffee or eat cake. When hammering out consensus, coffee and cake breaks keep it on track. And it's a Swedish institution, a fika. It's something the Swedes would never do. They would never refuse coffee and cake to build a better group, consensus and understanding. So Swedish decision making is based on consensus building. The diagram is a simple way to do it in a 3-stage process, and the first part starts with a word base, using semi-formal, correct, and proper to describe the process. Start with the word base, and then discussants begin setting the scene with plenty of context. This prepares them to pass through the first resistance barrier. In the second part, serious discussion begins, followed by more discussion, until a consensus is reached. In the third part, a summary is needed to filter through the barrier of more resistance, where there is reluctance to seek a new consensus. So you rest. Then do it all over again when a new consensus is needed. The Swedish way is best for making society less prone to dysfunctional political gridlock. And then you see the diagram. So Nordic capitalism, values and action. Nordics are deeply committed to equality and democracy as a single concept. In Nordic social political culture, because you can't have one without the other, Sweden uses income distribution to mitigate extreme inequality with economic policies and strategies of progressive individual taxation and high consumptive tax. And we'll get into the particulars of that later. Fair wage levels determined by economists and union leaders in consensus create a large consumer market class with adequate money to spend on goods. When properly administered, overall benefit to society is assured. So, give me 1 second. So a century ago, Nordics did not settle to fascism, socialism, communism, or capitalism. All competing ideologies of the time were backed by powerful nations surrounding them. During the Second World War and then global proxy wars, they were locked down in place between opposing ideologies. A Scandinavian middle path was sought. Many took sides in the struggle. Workers with socialist ideals, small business owners, elites, capitalists, industrial capitalists, crony capitalists, all of them took part, and a mixed economy took shape with capitalism and socialist components known as the middle way. Nordic stakeholder capitalism is also a very functional public sector with no corruption. It preserves the benefits of capitalism, encouraging worker participation while assuring stakeholder mentality of long-term responsibility of both workers and management. And there's a very high work ethic, civic participation, social cohesion, and individual responsibility and family values. These are all deeply embedded social institutions, placing the Nordic countries ahead of many of the others. On top of all the annual list, it measures sustainability and soft power as success preceding the invention of capitalism. So women in Sweden also participate at a far greater level in national parliaments than in Europe and in North America. And this is all part of the culture, the Scandinavian culture, that makes them able to form this so-called middle way. Now, on these two charts here show the Gini is a metric for inequality. So on this Gini rising, both charts show an effect of redistribution, retraction due to Sweden's 1990s tax reforms. The combination of a resurgent privatization and lowering taxes had a noticeable effect upon the Gini number. And if you look at the orange section on this slide, you can see some of the take-home points that I put here. I'll read them to you. Inequality greatly increased in the mid-1980s to the late 2000s due to the 1990s tax reforms. The Gini coefficient of 30%, Sweden's Gini coefficient went down 30%, and that's an income distribution metric. So you see that chart off to the left. It shows the difference between the US, Sweden, and the standard for the OECD countries. And the plot that they plot, it plots their progress through 1975 to 2010 on that. And you can see how that huge increase occurred for Sweden when they switched back to capitalism. Okay, redistribution. What is it and how it works? Income redistribution redistributes income in society by transfer from rich to poor. The purpose being to solve or at least minimize the gap between poor and the rich. Transfer is direct with cash or check, or indirect with typically involves some tax form. Government economists use economic policies and strategies like progressive taxation to implement it. So closing the gap is a central concept of a healthy society. So economists worldwide see, see result and cost of extreme poverty on society's mental and moral health as the negative effects of extremely widened income gaps become more common. Economists must rise to the challenge of closing these gaps with new policies and solutions. So differences to be noted. It's not asset seizure. It should not be regarded as such. It's not asset seizure from the rich in society for distribution to the poor in society. Income redistribution uses strategic economic policies to transfer income from the rich to the poor. It does not involve forceful acquisition of people's assets, nor does it involve wealth redistribution or type of any other type of asset seizure. So the wrong perception and situation to avoid. Income redistribution is not about making incomes equal or taking from those with more to give to and giving it to others with less. The goal is to avoid the perilous situation of extreme inequality and avoid the notion of it being punishment to the rich. If properly administered, overall benefit to society and economic growth results. It creates a large consumer market class with the adequate income to sustain a healthy capitalism. How to accomplish desired the outcome. For a progressive tax system calibrated for higher income amounts to pay higher tax amounts. So the rich pay 5 to 20% more on higher incomes than ordinary or poor citizens pay. Organizations, especially religious bodies involved in charitable activities, do this also on a purely voluntary basis. So Nordic society is based on gender equality also. It's a guiding value of Scandinavian culture and the equality of women and men. Now, one of the keys to this culture, gender equality, is a Nordic cultural trait, giving high degree of workplace participation to women. And as an added benefit to this, it also led to a higher level of parental participation and responsibility among men. For a while last year, in January 1st of 2020, Sweden was the only Nordic country with a male prime minister as of January 1st last year. 4 female prime ministers were then heads of state in Finland, Denmark, Iceland, and Norway. So Norway's answer. So in the 1970s, Norwegian feminists entered politics to speed up the pace of democratic change. By 1981, women were sitting in parliament, in the prime minister's chair, and in the cabinet. Norway, in search of a larger labor force, found women to be the answer. Housewives' entrance into the workforce on equal footing with men doubled the tax base. It was a source of prosperity also. That action alone affected the Norwegian prosperity more than the North Sea oil discovery. A minister of finance calculated the effect of mothers joining the workforce on Norway's net national wealth. It was equivalent to its total petroleum wealth. So the North Sea oil, well, I'm not sure whether you realize it or not, Norway has a national sovereign wealth fund, and the resource behind the world's largest sovereign wealth fund. It it was the North Sea oil, which they found there decades ago. And at one point, the sovereign wealth fund, it reached 1 trillion in September 2017. It was the first such sovereign wealth fund ever to do so. But it's dropped below that level since due to changes in oil price at certain times. And then you see the chart here, which shows the declining gap between the pay between men and women in the Nordic countries. So social democrats became capitalism and kept their social welfare safety net. That's basically what happened when they switched from the socialist experiment back to capitalism. They decided to keep the social welfare safety net. So I wrote this part. I was more or less channeling what a social democrat would be thinking. So I'll read that off to you now. So equality achieved through democracy is essential in a just society. And the reason that I should have mentioned here at the top, Nordic social democrats are not anti-capitalist, but they believe in regulations, not just in regulatory capture. So inequality mitigated intentionally by government policy is less extreme than other capitalist societies. Everyone deserves an equal chance to contribute to society. Wealth is attainable by everyone through redistribution and not a select few. Benefits of low cost free education, medical, and healthcare make it possible. They provide the means for all to attain their highest potential and allow for stress free living, which makes a healthier person and society. And one of the mantras of the social democrats, of course, is work to live, don't live to work. We are not defined by our professions and work as much as by our relations and community with those around us. Shorter work hours, longer vacations give more job and life satisfaction. Full employment is sought and the dignity of one's labor and time assured by a fair wage, which shows respect for everyone's contribution. Social welfare safety net provides a support and confidence in times of need. In solidarity with others, we gladly contribute our share for the benefit of all. And then you see the map, which isn't really in very great definition, but it shows all four of the principal Nordic countries. So the difference between socially responsible and socialism. Nordic capitalism, unique blend of free market capitalism and social benefits. Social benefits are a form of wealth. Free education, free healthcare, free childcare, newborn care time off for both parents. All these add to a general well-being of society. Generous, guaranteed retiring pensions ensure a comfortable old age. Social cohesion, high from confidence and guarantee of social services. So taxpayers willingly fund benefits the government provides and manages services of all social, for all society to benefit. Trust in government is essential for social cohesion and well-being. Nordic voter turnout, again, as I mentioned earlier, beats the OECD, and you see the 69% average. And Denmark has an average of 86, Sweden 86, Iceland 79, Norway 78, and unfortunately, Iceland matches it. The lowest Nordic country matches the standard average for the OECD at 69%. So low consensus building history, long consensus building history affects positive societal change with democratic process. So Nordic policies neutralize the troublesome aspects of capitalism also. Policymakers long ago chose a mixed economy to mitigate inequality gap between the rich and the poor through redistribution of taxation system. So individual-based tax structure rather than household, coupled with a flat tax rate, treats all citizens equally. And stakeholder capitalism also gives rise to community. And the Swedish version of capitalism is a stakeholder version. Transparent, functional public sector with no corruption, it preserves capitalist benefits for everyone. To maximize growth, innovation, and ability to shed workers, needed to transform business models quickly. This is generally a quality that you see in the US version of capitalism, but sometimes they institute it in Norway and in the Nordic countries. And when they do, the social welfare safety net is there to make sure that people have a soft landing. Now, with a generous social welfare system to support employees in transition time, as I just mentioned, It encourages workforce participation of a stakeholder mentality of responsibility to society from both employer and employee. So you see the chart here with this lovely image of some fjord, I guess, in Norway. Public trust in institutions quite high in the Nordics. Now, socially responsible capitalism mistaken for socialism. So right here on this chart is a layout of the neoliberal Anglo-American capitalism of different countries and what they give to their social benefits. So Northern capitalism sees these as elements of socially responsible capitalism and not socialism. Most European and the 30 OECD countries strongly believe in a free market economic system, yet they have variations of capitalism using higher taxes to pay for a social welfare system. Everything is not free. When they say free in the Nordic countries, it's an illusion. They pay for it in taxes. However, it's there for anyone at any time when they want it, which pretty much makes it free. So they have variations of capitalism using these higher taxes, and it's usually composed of 4 distinct spending areas. And you see 2 of them, pensions and income support, they're on the left side of the chart. And then 2 others, health and all social services except health on the right side. Now, of these 30 OECD, 30 country OECD lists, the average rate is 22.1% GDP for state-sponsored social welfare systems. Highest on the list are France with 32.1. France is never referred to as socialism, and it's the highest on there. Nordic countries follow: Denmark 30.2, Sweden 29.8, Finland 29.4, Norway 23.3, Iceland 18.5. They are sometimes referred to as socialism. But here's others: 29.7, Belgium, never referred to as socialist. Austria, 29.1, and the 6th place, never referred to as socialist. Germany, 27.8, Italy, 27.8, Spain, 26, never referred to as socialism, and Portugal, 25.6. And they're very close to the Nordic countries, but they're 1 to 4 percentage points off. And I guess that makes a difference. But even the UK, 24.1 is close. But the US, 19.2% GDP is very close to the bottom of the list. So rethinking Scandinavian model, culture matters. Ending poverty with growth is temporary. Rising inequality brings new poverty. So in the 1970s, Sweden was portrayed as utopia without city slums, with pollution, free air, and water. And then financial hardship from bad health, unemployment or old age didn't happen in Swedish society. Their reasonably efficient state welfare system virtually ended poverty in Sweden. So could favorable results from expanded welfare systems work for other societies? Nordic societies were considered among the world's best places to live for decades. You know, high living standards, low crime, all of these great aspects of living in a place, how long life expectancy, high social cohesion, even income distributions. They proved a third way path between socialism and capitalism together was doable and worked well. A quick study of Nordic history and culture and society best explains why it worked for Nordic countries. There's a long-standing organizational social structure of Nordic society that predated the welfare system. The Nordic experience had more than just a large welfare state to set it apart from other countries. Homogeneous populations and non-government social institutions uniquely adapted Nordic society to the modern world. High trust levels, high work ethic, civic participation, social cohesion, individual responsibility, and family values. They're all deeply embedded social institutions that guided Sweden Denmark, Norway to rise from impoverished to wealthy nations as industrialization and market economies became standard in the late 19th century. The Swedish example worked between 1870. Sweden, again an agrarian society, used free markets for the next 100 years. Sweden's low taxes, liberal regulations, and strong work ethics experienced unrivaled growth rate in Europe. And there, the graph that we saw early in the talk on one of the first slides indicate that. So Sweden basically in 1870 had a GDP per capita 57% lower than the UK, which was experiencing, of course, the Industrial Revolution. In 1970, it was 21% higher than the UK. So that shows you how it went from agrarian to industrial very quickly. So here's a few, I'm going to show you a number of different charts and metrics here and show you how the Nordic countries score very high on all of them. So here in this one, you see Northern Europe 2019 Quality of Life Index by country. So using a filter for the 219 Quality of Life Index shows 6 top positions include all 5 Nordic countries, in addition to Estonia, which is a neighbor in the Baltic region. So this is a very interesting, it comes from this website, numbio.com. And if you go there, you can, these are all interactive. You can change them and see how each one fares. And then also this is the average monthly salary in Sweden in 2017 by industry. Now, the Norwegian Confederation of Trade Units and a Confederation of Norwegian Enterprise also have something similar. And this is for controlled wages and working conditions of capitalist enterprises creating wealth in Norway. And each, you see in the Nordic countries, these are the jobs and the sectors off on the left, and off to the right, you see the pay scale, which is for each of those. And this, the intent being for this, it was to minimize disparity between high and low wage jobs through cooperation to balance outcomes between opposing sides. Now, average current exchange rate is around 8.3 Swedish kroners, and these figures are in Swedish kroners. So you would just divide that figure on the right by 8 to get an average monthly wage. So let's see. Swedish economic and export profile assures positive and balanced trade profiles. So machines and vehicles account for 32% heavy industry. Pharma and chemistry accounts for the biochem industry at 13%. Woods, minerals, and energy, those resources are 30%. Electronics and other goods, 19%, that's light manufacturing. And then foods and beverages, agriculture, around 6%. So it has a well-balanced economy. So here's also Swedish economic, and this is basically the Nordic countries consistently register superlatives appearing at top of list in many of these categories. And you see a whole list of them going all the way from start a business to happiest country, least corruption, highest rule of law index, highest trust of government, voter turnout, best high living standards, highest life satisfaction, highest gender equality, 19 most open, stable, and efficient economy. It goes on to the end here, you can see. And at the end, fastest internet connection speed. Only recently were they outdone in that by the Japanese. So this is another graph here, and it's kind of interesting. This is a radial. This is basically the Nordic countries, how they excel on the top of the list, and 11 criteria to define well-being. And those criteria, you have life satisfaction, health, education, environment, work-life balance, safety, jobs, housing, income, community, and civic engagement. And then you can see the percentage of all those. Okay, and then next, this is a radial graph. It's kind of interesting, this radial chart. And you can see how it's very difficult to read though, but it's very intriguing. So let's move on to the next chart or the next case here, in this slide. These are using spark lines here, which basically show trending up and down. So you see most of these qualities, Sweden has arrows on the right side that are trending up or equal. There are a few going down here, jobs and earnings, unfortunately, that some going up, some going down, some staying the same. That's second category. So you can do a quick overview of seeing the trends that are up and the trends that are down. Environmental quality, third from the bottom, trending the same and going up. And then personal security, equally and going up, trending. And subjective well-being, staying pretty much the same with the Nordics. Okay, and the World Justice Project here. They have the top 10 ranking, 2018 Global Index by country. 4 Nordic countries top the list: Denmark, Norway, Finland, and Sweden. You see it in front of you. And then the rules, these are some of the qualifications, the eight metrics they used, starting with constraints on government powers and ending with criminal justice. Okay, and here's again, it's part of the World Justice Project. And again, you see the same chart we used before in the other one. And here it's broken down by color, a color code. So on this one, it's a corruption index. And the Nordic countries, they come out as least corrupt, trust government to build consensus in decisions and state policies to benefit all. So that's, they are very high on this mark. You see Denmark, Finland, and Sweden, they're and Norway, all there from 7 on up. And New Zealand and Singapore are then. Usually Switzerland's quite high on these as well. So let's look at one other thing here. This is Sovereign Wealth Fund for Norway, and it hits 1 trillion. That was on September 19, 2017. And they felt that all the wealth oil should be kept out of Norway and invested abroad. And every year, 4% is removed from the profit to use for the Norwegian budget. And the leaders, they thought it would be better not to flood Norway with oil wealth and inflate their currency, so they invested it for posterity. A very noble thing to do. And you can see the other sovereign wealth funds, quite a few are Chinese. And then 2 of them, there's, you have, let me see, you have a few of them Chinese, and then you have Hong Kong and Singapore as well, which is also considered Chinese, even though it's not mainland China. Okay, let me go on to the next one. So here's more information about the Sovereign Wealth Fund, and Norway is investing in New York City real estate. And you can see from 2014 to 18, you can see the buying and the selling, how they're buying big pieces of real estate. This is just talking in billions here. And only sovereign wealth funds can play that game. And then Sweden also happens to be the capital for asylum seekers per million population. You see how far ahead they are on that. So much of the world is drawn to Sweden. So now, what I'm going to talk about now is the work. It was in a graduate paper, and it talked about Sweden was originally the original social laboratory. So this is really interesting part. And then also we'll talk about a book that was written by an American that introduced Sweden in the 1930s to the US and the world. Okay, so Nordic capitalism, greatly influenced by Sweden, entered the world stage in three different frames. The social laboratory, that was the first frame. Sweden, the perfect social change testing ground in the 1920s. A 100-year process began in Sweden's unique settings, new ideas tested for decades by radical, yet mainly reformist politicians, popular movements, experiments in science and or social science. So it was a time of fallen empires and competing ideologies, and the world was ready to modernize. The era between world wars shaped Sweden as a country and a culture into the essence of modernity. In a controlled space, isolated from chaos, world chaos, new changes and effects were immediately noticed. So in Sweden's plain and simple and neutral Scandinavian background. Now, ironically enough, the Rockefeller Foundation was first to arrive there. And the reason behind that, they were influenced to use Sweden for social experimentation to align with their own foundation ideals of practical and useful social science intended by foundation trustees to neutralize what at that time was a growing radicalization in American academia that made it unsuitable for foundation experimentation goals at that time. So Sweden was the perfect solution, able to satisfy both sides with their middle way approach. So remodel, refine, and refocus. Social scientists modeled Sweden as a rapidly modernizing country to make parallels with America, focusing on the transitioning to modernity theme. So it turned out to be the right path for everyone. The same path also transitioned the social laboratory frame into the middle way model. And the middle way model is what Sweden was looked upon as in the 1930s. And there you see the flags of them. So this is the book that was written by the American author who was working as a journalist. It turned out to be a bestseller. The Middle Way, Introducing Sweden to the US and the World. In 1936, US journalist Marquise Childs published the book Sweden, the Middle Way, thereby introducing Americans to his research from various trips to Sweden. Now, he was working there as a journalist and observing the workings of the reform policies of the Social Democratic Worker Party of Sweden. Childs collected information on many visits to Sweden as a reporter for a book. And his book eventually, it shifted the world's focus to Swedish economic and social systems as a new model worthy of notice. Now, critics faulted it for generalizations, lack of critical viewpoint, and inaccuracies to marginalize his message. So it was an international bestseller, nevertheless. And only in Sweden, he said, did capitalism function without serious default. To the world, Childs claimed a hothouse of laissez-faire still existed in Sweden. In spite of his critics, it became an international bestseller and is still considered influential today. So the rational path reconciling opposites. There alone, Childs said, the laws of supply and demand were not wholly invalidated by the spread of monopoly. State, consumer, and producer intervened to make capitalism work for the greatest good of the whole nation. The Swedish rational path reconciled two competing systems to be workable together. Sweden had a well-defined middle path between Russian absolute socialization and Depression-era American capitalism. The key above all else was the Swedish willingness to adjust, to compromise, and to meet what appears to be reality. So the middle way, taking the best from socialism and capitalism. And it was always a work in progress. It evolved in the 1930s between totalitarianism and capitalism. as a positive example to others, as a work in progress, pragmatic yet principled, a socio-political method for trial and error. The middle way was initially a non-ideological and conciliatory pragmatism between extremes. It was Sweden's balancing act to avoid commitment to both totalitarianism and capitalism, and it was inclined to plan and organize. Sweden being of Germanic in origin, they are prone to use planning and organization to find a method to do anything. So global markets were floundering in the 30s, and economic stability and social organization was still eluding nations that were mired in a financial recovery. Now, Marquise Child notes Sweden as an exceptional case. And again, some of these are his quotes, some things I paraphrase. The significance that Sweden's achievements at that time were debatable and limited. The state of peace and prosperity and general well-being were in striking contrast to the disorder and unhealth in the rest of Europe, which was post-war at that time, or post-depression actually, in the 30s. And it came out of a national consciousness and pride for the Swedes, further heightened by a realization of the dangers confronting a small country in imperialist, industrialist Europe. It is a lesson in the value of certain neglected virtues, patience, perseverance, and caution, in which the Swedes in particular are especially endowed. Now, certainly they have qualities which set them apart from most people. The Swedes are homogeneous to a remarkable degree. That's not contested. So there is virtually no public graft, however, in Sweden. Social and economic education has penetrated to the mass of people and has been built upon an inherent regard for democratic institutions. So you have a well-educated base that actually believes in democratic institutions. That's a big plus. So the middle way, navigating between chaos and coercion for social order. Consensus and well-being of social order is the only goal. So Sweden found a way to navigate a middle course using the principles of an American socioeconomic system built on chaotic competition and the Soviet one built on coercive cooperation. As such, economic liberty and independence are preserved by the state and the collective will of the consumer. Sweden's ruling SDP, the Social Democratic Party, uses a cautious gradualism, advancing slowly only with the approval of an overwhelming mass of voters. Their concern is only a well-being of social order rather than a socialization as a concept or goal. So here again, they're always building consensus for everything. One US economist noted in particular that Sweden was perfect as a social research lab. He said, his name was C.J. Ratzlaff, and Scandinavian countries in particular, their long history in social experimentation and legislation and achievement was very enlightening. A sensitive social democracy of articulate citizens, high responsible civil servants, productive and progressive in social reform. They were very much like a social laboratory already for centuries. There were three crucial factors to the middle way that the writer of the book, Marcus Child, said were the method for successful control of capitalism. Now, unfortunately, these all sound socialism, but I will say it nevertheless. The first one was the strength of consumer cooperatives. They seem to have been the most important according to Childs. The role of the state is the second one in the economy. It kept private monopolies from developing. It competed so efficiently in many fields. And the third one, existence of an all-powerful trade union movement. That, of course, is long gone here in the US. Okay, then and now. So we discussed that. At that time, consumer co-ops were still relevant in European countries as remnants of an agrarian economy. But today, They seem outdated and only feed a socialist image. So trade unions, on the other hand, all but disappeared from the US and UK in Reagan and Thatcher era. So the Swedish model, highly egalitarian vision of capitalism, refined, remodeled, and ready to export like a trade item. That was the final product of the Swedish middle way. So the Swedish model arose in the 1960s as a current view on the internal organization of Swedish political economy, an ideological makeover to a high egalitarian order served to abstract the Swedish experience and prepare it for export as a new third way. It became more relevant to other societies. The Swedish model was also injected with a utopian dystopian tension, which the original, rather utopian image of the middle way had largely lacked. It became the most well-known socio-political image of Sweden as the Swedish model. More specifically, the Swedish model refers to a particular way of organizing modern society through, among other things, mixed economy. It was first essentially a mixed economic model, and collective bargaining and social policy it uses to build consensus, reflecting a set of progressive social liberal values. So Scandinavian skills, sets, and method. Neither system nor dogma binds them. These ultimate pragmatists are interested only in the workability of the social order. That was a quote from Mr. Childs, the book's author. This is the greatest contribution to political and social thought yet, unfettered result-oriented common sense. The exceptional Scandinavian skills of adaptation and modification makes them world-class negotiators and peacemakers. In fact, the word ombudsman is a Swedish invention, believe it or not. So Nordics continue in their remarkable ability to adapt and deliver realistic solutions. They remain true to their nature of consensus, compromise, and resolution without time wasted attaching blame. They have resumed a market-based economy, which they always had, and are the object of much interest to the future of capitalism. They quietly go about their own business of living the Nordic lifestyle, while the rest of the world continues trying to figure them out. Okay, thank you very much. So we can go on to questions now. If anyone has that, or they want me to clear up anything that I said that they were not sure about.
Well, there is a lot of activity on the chat, so you're going to have a lot of questions.
Okay.
I think I've seen Yanis raise his hand a couple of minutes ago. Yanis, are you still here? All right, so Lawrence.
Yes, hello everyone. I had a question. How is it that they avoid big business capturing the government? You did mention something about regulatory capture, but how does that not happen? And let me ask the related question, how do they fund their elections?
How do they, what was the last part of the question again?
How do they fund elections? Say you're a candidate for office, where do you get the funds to run?
Well, first of all, it's entirely different there in many ways. First of all, a businessman, a popular businessman, does not always find his way into politics. You know, you have to go to the education, essentially, is free for anyone that works and pays the taxes. So most people that go into politics are people that are interested in basically a socio-economic culture of order. So from the very get-go, you have that. You don't have populist. You do have populist there sometimes, but you don't have a populist situation like here in the US or what happened in Hungary like that. You don't have that. And then how, they just agree, everyone just agrees to pay the taxes into the country. And a lot of people that are Americans that have lived there, they've said more or less to the effect that they really enjoy having that ability there. They would pay for it anyways. So they enjoy having it there for whenever they want. And it's a service that's provided by the country to everyone at every work level. So, I mean, I've answered some of your question, and just tell me if there's any other part you need answered there.
I don't understand how come the wealthy and the big businesses are not able to influence the government like we have here.
It's a different culture, as I said, everyone is educated, and it says in this book that Childs has written, it would be a good idea if you have a chance to maybe get a hold of that book. Now, I've read a lot about it. I haven't read it, so I can't really say, but it's the Scandinavian culture tends to be an honest culture. To an American, I mean, I'm assuming you're American, it doesn't necessarily mean you are, I don't know. But to an American, I say, it does sound really awkward that people and the politicians should be very honest and upright people, but it just happens to be the case in Norway. They're interested in a solution-oriented society. They're not interested in blaming, and I mean, for instance, when I first went to Europe, and they have in Germany and Netherlands as well, and Sweden, they have the Honorat system. And it's a system whereby you just get on the streetcar and you buy a monthly or a weekly pass, and you don't need to continually buy a ticket. And then they have inspectors that come around to keep everyone honest, and they check it. And most everyone passes the honesty test. They don't try to sneak on without paying. And I mean, to me, when I first saw that in the 70s, when I was there, I thought, this is crazy. How do they do it? But they do it. Does that help, Annie?
Interesting. So you are saying that there is no Citizen United equivalent in Scandinavia, right? Where corporation can donate as much as they want and own political parties.
I mean, it's quite funny. I when I did the research for this, I looked at some Michael Moore's film when he'd gone to Sweden, and there's a section in there when the jailers are all singing "We Are the World." Everyone in the jail. I mean, I couldn't believe it. In other words, the Swedes and the Nordics in general believe that any person that they meet at any time in their country, they want them to be their neighbor. So they will do whatever it takes to build a system that makes everyone into a good neighbor.
Okay. Yanni, has your computer cooled down? Okay. Well, until Yanni comes, let's go to
Video.
Peter Small from Australia. Peter, you are still muted.
Yes, Michael, a wonderful lecture. I think we should all admire the Scandinavians. I'm interested in what your view is about how the banking system in Scandinavian countries, the success of Germany has been the way in which credit has been created and allocated in their economy, which gets back to their banking system. I just wonder what part the banking system and the creation of credit played in the Nordic countries.
I'm glad you asked that. That's a very good question, because in the Nordic countries and then also in Germany, in Germany, it's really apparent. The banking system there is 70% like public banking, 60 to 70% public banking, and only the rest is private. And also in the US, there is only one public bank, and that's in North Dakota. And of course, North Dakota back in the 1800s was full of German and Swedish farmers. And they were used to getting, they had a co-op system. What I mentioned the co-op system there. The Swedes always had that. The government instilled that co-op system so these farmers could get their crops to market, and they set these markets up for them to sell there. Now, as far as the banking goes, the Swedes and the German-speaking people are very much acclimated to banking as being a service, not as a way to make money. And that's the difference. They see it as just service. That's why they were able to get a public bank in North Dakota, because these people were losing their grain sales every year to the grain market. Most of these bankers in Minneapolis were speculating on the commodity market, driving the price real low and controlling it, and then taking hold of the grain and then reselling it to the end user. And the Swedes, and very much so the Germans, have always had public banking in the picture, and they used it at all times. And that it's just a natural, it's a natural following that banks exist to help the community and people there, believe it or not. Does that answer your question?
Yes, certainly. That's very interesting because
Yeah,
you
so
know, that
definitely read up and about the German banking system, and you'll learn a lot more about that, because they're one of the best examples.
Yeah, I'm very interested in the German banking system. I've been following it for a while because it's the same system that Japanese adopted prior to the Second World War, which of course now most East Asian countries, including China, use. So there's a really difference in the whole way in which money is created and how it's allocated. And
Well,
that's where
they started late in the Industrial Revolution. So they formed a lot of joint stock companies, is what England was doing with the boats when they were traveling all around the world, and doing trading. And they isolated like 5 different sectors that they got on the board of directors for all these companies, for chemical. That's why they have big chemical industry there, chemical, and then construction, building, all kinds of things like that, and of course for food, commodities. And they always had a banker on the board that could steer the business toward community benefit.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Alan Smith.
Oh, hi. Yeah. Hi, Michael.
Yeah, hi, Alan. Thanks for coming.
Sure. Just wanted to ask about the background of the Scandinavian and Nordic countries. You mentioned before the social experiment that occurred, say, in the Depression era and led into this middle way concept. What was it? You said that they were already prime place to try this kind of a thing. And
right.
So
okay.
say a little more about what it was like in the 19th century or in their
well, it has
history.
Okay, yeah. Alan, all of this has to do with what I mentioned earlier with the Germans about solidarity and subsidiarity. And that all goes all the way back to the Roman Catholic Church. In other words, it starts on the local level and builds up. And that, they even have all these organizations in Germany, and then also in the ones in Germany are more well known, but they have them in Sweden as well. For the longest time, they had NGOs, non-government organizations, that were there for the benefit of the local people, like friendship societies and things like that. It was already set up for that, and they used them. And I mean, the weather is very cold in those places. You need a reason to meet and gather and be social, in the very lively and flamboyant sense. So what happens is they had these NGOs that they formed, and they're set up for the as he said in his book, Childish, at one quote, he said they are obsessed with getting a socio-economic system that works. I mean, there's no other country or other system in the world that purposefully tries to have such an egalitarian society as the Nordics. And they found that to be, and by doing that, it brings out all the best qualities in other people, because then you have this social welfare safety net that catches people in times of need, and people express extreme gratitude when things happen, and they are saved by the social welfare safety net. And so that's how they were more or less set up, as they were, as that one American researcher and sociologist said, that they've been a social testing site already for 100 years, because these different organizations that formed for that solidarity and subsidiarity complex. Now, do you understand what I mean about that?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense.
Okay.
I don't know why it happened less so in, say, France or the UK or Greece or the United States. But
Well, they're just they're different cultures, and different cultures,
yeah,
different things spring from different cultures,
yeah,
So
and that
Michael,
that
you
just
are-
happens
gotta
to
be a
be.
historian.
if I may just interject there, Michael, if culture is a defining factor of what happens in Scandinavia, then basically you are saying it's a model that is not exportable, because it's something very difficult to export a culture.
Well, yeah, that's a good point,
Good
Ibrahim.
point.
Thank you for bringing that up. Now, yes, you can't export the culture, but they set up that model for a socioeconomic government model, and they set that up so it could be exported. And there were 3 different ways that they sort of sold it, and in the end, it ended up being a sort of utopian dystopian type, and the Swedes were always made and to be more modern. But in the beginning, it was just, they had to do everything they could to stay neutral. They were the Scandinavian countries were between England, Germany, and Russia. So they had to really, they could have gone either way to any of them, but they never did. They didn't want to, they wanted to basically have everyone like a good neighbor. It was like a good neighbor policy.
Okay, Michael, we have many more questions coming. So let's go with Tom Rossman.
Mm.
Tom,
Hey, sorry about that. Yeah, I had to unmute. So yeah, I wanted to actually provide a little bit more of a framework, because I've done a lot of work on comparative economic and political systems, and also the culture point. And basically my comment is around, I think a lot of people misunderstand this because they frame this in a battle between capitalism and socialism, and that's not really how it developed. For example, we talked about the German welfare state. So really what the Swedish model is basically an expanded welfare state model. And because they have this social cohesion and this trust of government, they don't mind paying higher taxes because they get a great value for their money in the return that they get from the government services. And a perfect example of that is child care services. Part of the affordability crisis in the United States is child care and the rising costs of child care. And Sweden had very high quality child care facilities funded by the government, which not only alleviated family pressure, but it also allowed women to more fully enter and integrate into the business system, into the business world. So the Scandinavian model, specifically Sweden, is really very unique. It's more of an expanded welfare state than socialism, and I hate that people call it social democracy because it really isn't. It's really just an expanded welfare state because they have this cohesion that enables them to trust the government and get more out of government. And so I think Yeah, and that's the context. So the other comment about culture is, I agree 100% with Ibrahima that you have to really be careful about that, because what you're really talking about in a technical sense is institutions. And so if we could have institutions in the United States that we built confidence in, we could replicate some of the things that the Swedish model and the Scandinavian model represent, because we have enough of a government expertise. If we were able to kind of reverse the trend since the 1970s of government being thought of in a very poor sense and being very suspicious of government, we could have institutions like in Sweden, which would allow us to pay a little more in taxes and in exchange get much better services back from the government.
Well, thank you, Tom. As usual,
Thanks, Tom.
you're right on target.
Great.
And what the point you make is extremely important. And it shouldn't be culture as such of the nation. It should be culture of the ethical behavior, I think, is what you're pointing at. And
yes, and there's so much. Also, if I could just make one additional comment, which is,
please do.
I've heard Finnish and Norwegian educators talk specifically about how much easier it is for them to teach in a much more homogeneous environment, and that the economic and racial inequalities in the U.S. make it really tough to deliver the same type of service in many respects. But that's just a challenge we'll have to overcome.
That's a great point. Yeah. Ed Dodson.
Michael, your mentioning of the Bank of North Dakota, in the context you mentioned it, raised a thought in my mind. Some on the call will have taken the course that I taught on money banking and credit, and I covered the history of the Bank of North Dakota. And the fact that you indicated that the people who migrated to North Dakota came from the Nordic culture, I hadn't thought of that before, but it may have had an impact on how the Bank of North Dakota operated to protect farmers who lost their farms during the Great Depression, which one of the great differences was, although many farmers defaulted on their agricultural loans and were foreclosed upon, the Bank of North Dakota, instead of selling those farms on the open market, rented them or leased them back to the farmers. And after the Second World War, began to sell the farms back to those same farmers on affordable terms, which did not occur anywhere else in the United States. So it may have had something to do with what you're talking about. And also what Tom mentioned, also triggers the fact that in the early part of the migrations to North America, there were many ethnic enclaves, and it took a while for people to become assimilated. So that would somewhat explain why there's such a difference in the attitude toward government and politics in certain parts of the United States that were dominated by immigration from the Nordic countries.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you for highlighting that point about what they did in the Depression by putting all their mortgages on, keeping them on the books and selling back to them. That's not really what we expect of banks in the U.S. And as I said, also, the Nordics and the Germans tend to look at the banks as a service industry, not so much like a wealth-making industry.
Good. Michael, Larry has some comments, I believe. Not a question, but some comments.
Sure. Thank you.
Hello, Michael. Thank you, as always, for such an excellent presentation. I do have a question first before the comments, because I spent some time in Sweden a few times. but I have a question about your description of the consensus democracy. It sounds very similar to a jury system.
Good point.
So does that also work out as in a hung jury? If the consensus can't be reached, then they go back to the drawing board.
Yeah, I guess that they're always trying to build consensus. So if it doesn't work, they just stop, and they built it up to like maybe 40%. Then they have another meeting and try 50%, and
Mhm.
eventually something comes up.
Mhm.
'Cause, people, their goal is to have a functioning, working socioeconomic system.
Mhm.
You just have to look and see what the result of what they built up, and it almost seems unbelievable. Like I know when you went, I mean, I don't know, I suspect when you went there you saw things that made you couldn't quite understand, but they made sense once you got to understand what the culture a bit more.
Well, that's an interesting thing that goes into also about the theory about land ownership. I had a definite sense that because I've been to most of the Nordic countries, that they all have a very strong sense of owning the country, that it's theirs. Their history is their family have owned it, and they're going to continue to own it. So the honesty that you spoke about, yes, very much so. Most of the time I was there in the 90s, and yes, but then it's just logical. It doesn't seem that it's anything special. In fact, a lack of honesty doesn't make sense to them, which I understand that as well. I think one of the things perhaps that you could add to this presentation another time would be a little bit of history on Nobel. Nobel, I've been to his home, and I'm not really a fan of going to those tours, but this was the most amazing thing I've ever been. He spoke 5 languages, and the reason that he started the whole prize system is because his family invented dynamite, or at least the process of making it stable enough to sell it. And most of his family died in the process of making the dynamite. And so when he realized the amount of death that his family and the money that he had received caused, he decided to start all of those prizes with that money from his profits. And that is you talked about them singing in the prison. That's an amazing concept to pay back for what you to the world. And the reason for the Peace Prize not being in a different location, for it to be in Norway, is because the Norwegians and the Swedes have had a long tradition of not getting along. So that's why the Peace Prize is in Oslo. So this concept, and that's Nobel is a hero of the Nordic people, and the example that he sets, because I think the thing that connects all of the Nordic countries together is the extreme temperatures. The picture you see behind me, that's the Alaskan mountains. So I spent a lot of time in Alaska, and the environment will kill you. It will kill everybody in the community eventually. So that also doesn't surprise me that they expect their politicians to tell the truth, because if they don't, their history teaches them, if they don't work together, the environment will kill them. So yeah, that was the comment to go in with those other questions that you brought back about the culture, the homogeneousness, and the honesty. I think it all links into the environment, their history, and the people. Now, on a converse note, the inventor of Semtex, the plastic explosive, well, when he realized, because he's Czech, when he realized all the destruction that he did, he committed suicide. That was his contribution. So yeah, there's something different in culture, but then again, maybe it has to do with the environment. So any thoughts, any questions?
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm glad you pointed that out, because extreme environments actually bring out the best in people.
Yes.
you know, and I mean, you see, even if you look in the Quran, you see there's a code of hospitality there also. You know, you can't, someone comes to your door, you can't send them back out into the desert, he'll die. You have to be a host. So lots of times I know when I travel to Muslim countries, for me is the best of hospitality. I just had tremendous luck there. I couldn't believe it. And then, you know, in cold climates, there's always like 2 or 3 door layers that you have to get through before you get to someone. You know, you have to get buzzed into the yard, then you have to get buzzed into the building, then buzzed into the apartment. You know, so there's a lot of, you know, they don't talk that much, you know, like the Norwegians, you know, they don't talk that much supposedly. And I know they declared their freedom from, well, the same happened with Finland, you know, during the World War II, they declared their freedom from, I think from Sweden as well, or from Russia, actually.
I'm not too much, but I do have one banking comment that I noticed while I was in Norway, is the bank had a new equation on the outside of their bank. It said 1 + 1 = 3. Can anybody guess why 1 + 1 = 3 according to the bank?
Well, let's hear it.
Because a man and a woman get married and they have a kid.
Ah. Okay.
Interesting.
Brilliant, you know, so they were, you know, advertising loans for, you know, young families, and it was
Right.
absolutely brilliant. So, but anyway, it was a wonderful presentation. I learned so many things I didn't know already, and explains why I had such a great experience while I was there. Oh, one other little thing that the Swedish found very surprising when I was there is IKEA is not blue and yellow. The buildings are not blue and yellow. They're actually red and white. And all the Swedish people at that time didn't know that around the world, the IKEA is painted a different color. They thought all of them were red and white. So
Really?
yeah, that was just one business thing where they didn't change it, or they changed it for the world, but for themselves, they kept it as red and white. So anyway.
Interesting.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you so much. I'll stop talking now.
Okay. Great. We're gonna have one more questions, Wayne, and then we'll close it, Michael. 806.
Yeah, hi, this is Wayne. A couple things. One mention was made of Finland. Actually, it got its independence from Russia in the wake of the Russian Revolution, right after World War I. Before that, it had been a Grand Duchy, and it did have some regional autonomy, even its own money for a while before then. But they did get their independence after World War I. The other thing I wanted to mention earlier was that about land ownership in Sweden. Apparently, Sweden has a law that allows private individuals to just walk on private land without permission, as long as they don't do any damage to it or break, or they don't have landowners potentially shooting at them just for crossing the land, and they have had that as part of their traditions for centuries, I think. I said.
Interesting.
Yeah, so the World War II, Stalin tried to invade Finland. They actually did. It was harder, but they ended up doing it. Because they would Finns were kind of culturally close to someone. Hitler could have used that to attack in a way that is they didn't plan for. So that's the first thing they did. That's how Russia started the war,
Abraham, can you say that again? Because the echo, I couldn't hear what you said.
I really don't know why I'm having echoes. Is it okay now?
It's fine now.
Yeah, I was just saying Russia actually invaded Finland during the Second World War.
Okay,
that's actually just to add to that, Ibrahim. That's a really fantastic story of the Finns and how they bravely defended their territory and held off the Russians for a very long time. It was really act of bravery and courage for them to the way they defended their homeland.
Yeah, they gave the Red Army a tough time, you know.
Oh yeah, big time.
Their uniforms were in white like snow, so the Russians were not seeing them, you know, and it was very, very hard.
Yes.
Anyway, so just a little historical parenthesis there. I guess, Michael, we can close it. And what would be the next session? It's going to be China, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. How would you call China? Is it a market Maoism as we called it before, or state capitalism? You know.
Well, I mean, it's state capitalism, but of course, as always, one book on it is capitalism with Chinese characteristics. In other words, the Chinese have managed to like adapt it to their culture. That's all they've done. And then, I mean, if anybody wants to get a good study up before a presentation on China, there's a video, Century of Humiliation. That's a great video. If you see that video about China, you'll understand a lot more about the culture and the country.
Is that available on YouTube?
I've seen it, yeah, on YouTube. It's a Century of Humiliation.
Okay.
And I think it goes about 2 hours, I think.
Wow.
Hour, 40 minutes.
That's long. Okay. Anyway.
But it's very instructive.
Thank you, Michael. So thank you all for coming, and thank you for your patience with all the technological challenges that we had. We hope to do better next time. So I'm hoping to see you all next week again for another session of this class that would end it, I believe. But we do have a session on Wednesday with Marty. Marty is finishing his class this week. And then we'll have Alana and Ted Gortney. Thank you and good night all.
Okay, thank you everyone for showing up tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.